there's just this collapse. And, from a boss perspective or an employee perspective, just getting clarity on, is this one of those things that in my workplace is not really a request that I can freely say no to, but is this really a requirement that I have to do?
Welcome to Season 2 of Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations, with your host, Executive Leadership Coach and CEO of the Granger Network, Kari Granger, and me, Paul Adams, CEO of Sound Financial Group. This season focuses on accountability, and to support you in increasing accountability in yourself and in those you lead, we're providing a special rate for our listeners who want to engage in one of our accountability courses. Text the word accountability to 555-888 for more information. This is episode 28, How to Distinguish Requests from Requirements.
Welcome back to Leadership Impact. Paul, I'm so excited about today's topic. You know why?
Why?
Because I have to listen to today's topic. Yeah, we're talking about distinguishing requests from requirements. And I don't care if, you're by yourself in a company and you work with other people, or if you're in your home with others, like when your partner, it sounds like a request, but it's really not. It's a requirement. Yeah. Or if you're an employee, or if you're the boss and you think you're handing out requests, but people are hearing them like requirements and they're dropping everything. So I feel like today's topic is probably important to both of us, given our relative roles in our respective companies.
Well, neither of us are very assertive at all, so I don't know why people would take it that way. I mean, that's what I like, and I feel the pain as well, Kari, because there's times that I'm not even making a request. I'm like making a suggestion.
Right.
And then somebody comes back after working on a project for my suggestion for 2 weeks, and I was like, oh dear, that was just an idea. You did a great job. So I think that you're right. This is something that moves all the way up and down the ladder at any company. And it reminds me of a time when I walked into an organization where I was like a high-level technical expert on the financial advising side for a team. And I worked directly for the CEO, but in one specific part of the business. It wasn't a role with any authority. And when I went in and I don't know the right term would be, but I would query the order. He'd say, we need to do this. And I'd be like, well, should we for these? Nobody had ever questioned it before. And it actually made me senior VP of distribution in 6 months.
Wait, you didn't get fired?
No. Now, by the way, what I didn't find out about until now, over 12 years later, I had a cup of coffee with a guy who also worked for the organization. He said, you may not know this, but that put a rapture through our organization. Just me pushing back, and not in a mean way, but hey, I need to know, is this the thing you really need? By when do you need it? How do we do it? And just that starting of querying the order. I don't know that I did it well. I think it panned out for me because I was the newest, shiniest object as a new high-level, pretty smart team member in my late 20s. And had it not been for that, I think I might have been, because I didn't have the skills that I hope we can suss out in the conversation today about how to properly, to my boss at the time, the CEO, how to do that in a way where I'm clarifying requests from requirements without being abrasive, which is one of my sometimes strong suits. Mm-hmm. And so how do we do the query of the order up if somebody's listening and they're thinking about this from their position organization, and people who have teams who are running the same problem you and I have now, where we make all kinds of, we say stuff and people take them like requirements. So I'm right with you.
Yeah, and I am one of those good idea fairies, and so I got to be really careful about that. But Paul, one thing I just want to go back on really quick. So we're about to have an episode here where we're distinguishing requests from requirements, and we're saying this is a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I just heard you say is you created a rupture in the organization, because I certainly, if I were listening, I'd be like, wait, what? Maybe I don't want to listen to this.
A rapture. As in the curtain was torn and all new possibilities were open, not a rupture.
Oh, I must have heard that wrong. Okay, so
well,
it's a good thing.
Listeners could have heard it wrong too. It was a very good thing. And after that, it actually opened the space. And that's what I want our listeners to think about, is when you open this space of conversation with your team, or with the leader of the team that you're on, you can create enormous new space within the organization to create the future you guys are after. You could be uneasy even listening to this and uncomfortable when you do some of the things that Kari's going to teach us today, but goodness, it like lives in legend within that organization still over a decade later.
Oh, got it. Oh, that's so good. I was just listening to one of the people from an organization that we've led a course to, and we spoke about this. And she was so excited because, she had just taken by default anything that her boss said. She was such a great worker. She would drop it and she'd stay up late and she'd make it happen. And she couldn't quite get to know. But she did start she made one move. She said, "By when do you need it?" And when the boss came back and said, "Oh, if we could get it within 2 weeks," she nearly fell over because that would have been something that she would have stayed up all night, moved everything else aside, and got done. And so, that's probably one of the simplest moves that we can even start with, which is just getting a clarity on, okay, I hear this, not even distinguish between a request or a requirement yet, just getting clarity on, and by when do you need it? Then I see her 2 weeks later, and she had tried the next thing, which is just as an experiment, right? Because she promised to do an experiment. It wasn't even that she needed it. She was just going to experiment, right? So her boss came in, she said, "When do you need it?" And her experiment was to push it out, just like do a counter offer, yeah? Like a negotiation. So this particular thing was in 2 days, and she said, "Would it work if I gave it back to you in 4?" And her boss said, yeah, I think that would work. And all of a sudden she goes, "Oh my gosh, I got so much freedom." Now, this is a regional leader. This is not like somebody who doesn't have to lead on a day-to-day. This is somebody that leads a lot of people that even in that position assumed anything coming out of the boss's mouth was like, "I got to get this done right away," and push everything aside.
And I think the thing a lot of people don't realize, we had a similar situation with a new staff member we brought in. Our clients are all over the country, so we just went ahead and hired a remote staff person. And when we did, I noticed we'd make a request and I would get it back in like 2 hours, and it was something I didn't need for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And she was a new team member. All the rest of our team was used to saying, "By when do you need it?" And what I found, and this is what I think a lot of people listening may not realize, is it actually kind of messed me up to get things back that quickly because I didn't have it on my radar to deal with the thing for like another week. I sort of thought it would take her that long. And then all of a sudden it shows up 2 hours later and I'm like, well, I don't have the space to deal with this right now. And it would go to the bottom of my email box anyway.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Like a peek behind the curtain a little bit.
Yes. And I think that what we're even going to uncover here, Kari, I'm starting to hear it, is like the steps, like that silhouette chart of the evolution of man where it's like a chimpanzee and works all the way up to like somebody standing erect and then eventually they're back down hunched in front of a computer. But in this case, what that first step, by when do you need it, is like we can distinguish that. Somebody can walk away today and say, "By when do you need this?" What do you think the reverse of that is for the leader to their team to get people to begin to ask that?
I mean, the reverse for me as a boss is, when would it work for you to get this? Or if there really is a requirement, right? Or if I have a real clarity with my request, I can say, I need it I could actually do the intellectual effort to think about when do I really need it? You'd get it back quick. And if you said, I really, if you could get this to me, by the 15th of this month, right? So if I provided a little bit more clarity, it's all about clarity, so the reverse, I think, from the boss is to realize the propensity to want to do a good job. And here's the thing about workplaces, Paul. In any organization, when you go to work in an organization, you do agree to say yes to certain requests or demands made by certain people. In a way, you do, yeah?
Yes.
And here's what happens to most of us. We take this to mean that every request made by certain people is something that we can't say no to, and it's really a requirement. Yeah? And then we don't distinguish it. So we start to hear, as an employee, I start to hear everything as a requirement that I can't say no to. And I want to work hard. I want to please. I want to do a good job. Not everybody's that way, but a lot of us.
Or if you're not somebody that wants to please, you're somebody that wants to advance.
Or advance or...
And you may take it the same way. I got to get it done because I want to advance.
Totally. Or I just want you off my back. I don't know. But if
that happens.
If I can start to think of, there's just this collapse. And, from a boss perspective or an employee perspective, just getting clarity on, is this one of those things that in my workplace is not really a request that I can freely say no to, but is this really a requirement that I have to do? Right? Because if I see this as a requirement, there's no room for declination or negotiation. But if I'm clear that it's an actual request, I can negotiate, I can counteroffer, I can say yes, and I can say no. Now, how some people deal with seeing everything as a requirement if they can't get it done, as we've spoken about in previous episodes, is they just don't do it. And they hide out, or they make, reasons, or they make you wrong for putting on too many requirements.
Yes.
As a boss, I'm looking at that. I'm going like, wow, I just have to know this thing about a good chunk of human nature, not all of it, but a good chunk of it is they're going to come into a workplace assuming that what I say is a requirement that must be done right away. And as you said, it doesn't just mess you up like I'm not ready to receive it, but in some cases, I don't even get the opportunity to weigh in on what's a priority or not, because they're just going to hear everything as drop it, start it. Yeah?
Or start it, never stop it. We had a team member of ours move on, and it's really great, opened up her own business. She's very successful with it now. But when she was no longer with us, there were all kinds of things like the requests I had made a year ago that were still happen. I don't think they needed to happen anymore, but she had kind of put it on a set it, forget it model. And some of these things were costing us over $1,000 a month.
Oh my gosh.
And it was equally like, oh, well, there was no rechecking of requests and requirements asked of in the past of whether or not those are still appropriate for the mission that we're on, because I would put it as she would eat requests and leave behind results. And that is, for that type of personality, it's like, boom, I got that done and there's no back to revisiting it. So it's that purpose of by when does it need to get done? What is it somebody says if they've got a leader coming to them, going back to the followership piece, what do they say to begin to distinguish that with the leader they're working for?
I think if you're not used to it, then you probably have to just have a conversation, something like, up until now, I just want to let you know that everything you say, I'm hearing like I should drop what I'm doing and start doing that. And it just dawned on me that maybe some of the things you're saying aren't all requirements, but are actually requests or maybe even suggestions. Would it be okay if I, from time to time, and maybe every time in the beginning, I just ask for that clarification, because I think that that's going to ensure that I have my focus on the right priorities. That could be one way to just start. In other words, you got to have like the conversation so that when if you've been working somewhere for 3 years or 10 years and all of a sudden you come back at them and you say, well, is this a request or requirement? They're going to look at you like you got 3 heads, right?
Yes.
So, or send them this podcast episode maybe and talk about it.
I'll tell you, we're looking to take our team's productivity to a whole new level, because we're going to your productivity and accomplishment workshop being led by Sheila from your team out in Denver.
Yes.
Here at the, so it was September
30th
and the October 1st.
Yes.
And one of the big things I'm hoping that we can get out of it is something simple. Like if we can communicate about by when all the time, which we do a lot of now, and yet make sure that it's like, if there's a by when, that our team can query us as partners and as leaders in the organization to be able to say, okay, do you have any time blocked? I will deliver. Do you have the time blocked out to be able to deal with it incoming when it shows up? Like if it's a project that needs to be reviewed, we should have the time. If I know there's going to be something coming back at me I'm going to have to review, I ought to have the time squared away to do it, and them knowing that it's actually taking care of me to not get it done earlier.
Yeah.
because I want it to be received in my email box the day before it's in my calendar to deal with it. And any earlier requires additional cognitive load from me. And I think to your point, sending the podcast ahead of time to somebody and saying, hey, could we just have coffee or lunch and talk about this podcast and what I might be able to get out of it would be, I think, a game changer in most reporting relationships, whether it's somebody who's subordinate to you in the organization or somebody you're subordinate to in an organization. Just opening this up, which might be as simple as sending along an episode of this podcast.
Yeah. I have to tell you, one of my colleagues, she is so accountable like this. And she's also a mother, and she's got so much going on, and she is really committed to, also having a life. Right. And so sometimes when I make requests and she's like, okay, when do you need it by? And I'll say, well, does the end of the month work? And you know what she comes back with? She goes, will you even have time to review it? And I'm like,
exactly.
No, I won't. And so she goes, okay, I'm going to look for when you can review it. So because she has access to my calendar, she'll actually put a request in my calendar for an hour to review the thing that she's sending to me and tell me to send her my notes after that review. I mean, she's so accountable that she ensures she gets from me what she needs to produce what we've agreed it needs to be produced.
That is gold for this episode. And here's the reason why I think it is whoever's listening to this podcast that you're going to go talk to, perhaps you're a director of an organization, you're reporting up to a VP or somebody in the C-suite, and it can feel really tenuous to have this conversation. Lots of things moving the enterprise, mergers and acquisitions. You never know if one of the acquisitions you're a part of helping make occur may create a redundant role with you and somebody at the other organization. So how do you not push back, but walk alongside somebody to say, this is it? And that is a great example of somebody being, I don't know if the right term is, but like mission focused, outcome focused, so that there's no upset for them in the meanwhile. Like, you weren't upset when she said that. In fact, you felt enormously cared for. But if people only heard the first half of that conversation, like, holy mackerel, did you get fired? It's like, no, because I came right alongside. So the only reason I'm asking if you're going to have time to review is I know it's not going to give you the outcome you want, which goes all the way back to our episode on partnering.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I love that we've created such a dynamic in our organization that, when I say we need the report, we do like an analysis before we do strategic planning or cultural alignment. We do a cultural analysis, right? We do interviews and all that to kind of see the readiness of the organization, and we find out kind of the prevailing underlying moods and interpretations that are flying around, things like that. So before we show up to a client, we want to have that report ready, right? So my colleague knows that I'm always going to have input. And if she produces the report a day before, I'm going to say, no, we need to do it this way and that way. So before she says yes to anything, she says, when will it work for you to give me the response? And if I say too late, she goes, and I won't be able, I need at least a week after you respond to me, Kari. And it's like, oh man, the client is so taken care of, and I so know, that we're going to produce a quality result.
So as we close this episode, would you just revisit I'm going to say it the way I hear it as a layperson. You just tell me if I'm off, and just help our listeners with a little bit of extra knowledge around this. So I'm hearing like suggestion, do it or not, no big deal. Request could be, hey, we may need to negotiate a little bit. I may have maybe I can decline it. Maybe I could suggest a different outcome, etc. Requirements are for you to show up at this office and sit at that desk tomorrow. You've got to get it done. Am I close?
Yeah, I think one of the ways I might say it here is a request, you can say no freely. You can decline freely. I would say with a requirement, you can decline, but there will be a consequence.
Yes.
You can decline anything, but when you have a requirement or a demand, then the consequence is a lot greater.
Yes.
Like I can decline to follow the law, but the consequence could be I'm going to be in jail or pay a hefty fine.
Very good. Okay.
So I think it's just, when I'm making a request to somebody, if I have a request of you, is it really a request? It may not be a request, right? I really need this by this time. That's more of a requirement. I have another client and she says, I would strongly recommend that you do this thing, right? And it turns out strongly recommend was actually a requirement, which is like opposite of what you think a recommendation is. So I think it's just, boy, it's so, even if I'm an employee, to know that, my boss or colleague is not just employee supervisor, although it happens mostly there because there's a power dynamic, right? And we don't feel as empowered sometimes to push back, or we don't see our power authority as a boss. But in any relationship, to just know humans are not awesome at distinguishing between requests from requirements. And I can see that coming up in how I'm even raising my daughter. I say, okay, sweetheart, would you like to go get your shoes on? No. Well, boy, that was a problem because I just asked her if she'd like to, and she said no. So now what do I do?
You immediately said, I strongly recommend you. Oh, no, not that either.
And then I have to say, like, okay, go put your shoes on. So what is she learning? That requests aren't requests. No, they're requirements. And then we grow up and the person in the authority position says, I think we should do this. And you hear it as a requirement.
Well, I'll tell you, today, Kari, here's what I'm taking away. Number one, prior to us coming out to the Productivity and Accomplishment Workshop in Denver, Colorado on September 30th and October 1st, go to grangernetwork.com to be able to find the enrollment in that course. Prior to that, my team's going to listen to this because I want them to hear what I'm discovering and noticing so that they can help hold me accountable to it. Second is I'm actually going to have a different conversation with my kids and my wife just about that. I think that is tremendous. And what a great place to practice before going to the workplace. And then last but not least, I want to just encourage everybody again to look at those key team members, those people that are in your world that are as close to you as possible, that are the ones who their participation in your requirements and your requests, or your participation in theirs, will significantly impact the outcomes within your organization. Send them this episode. Say, could you listen to it between now and next week, and let's have a cup of coffee, because I just want to suss out some of these new distinctions and see if they would be useful for us as a team. And just that idea of requests and requirements. And I can hear that going around our listeners' organizations now, where they will just be able to say, hey, is this a request or requirement? And once somebody hears the episode, all the morality of it, all the I'm wrong if I don't have the capacity, or I'm failing if I don't, can all be melted away by everybody being in some sort of shared interpretation around this episode. So I just, once again, on behalf of our listeners and me personally, Kari, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we hope that this conversation today has been a contribution to your leadership impact. Thank you for tuning into Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations. Subscribe now at Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And to support you in your leadership impact, we've offered a special course rate to you, our listeners. Just text the word accountability to 555-888 and you'll receive the link. Learn more at grangernetwork.com and join us next week on how to transform your leadership impact with accountability.